everybody, and welcome back to an invisible and invisible illness awareness project. This week, I want to talk about a very challenging topic. This is something that's been on my mind for a long time, and I still don't even really know where to begin or how to tackle this. Typically on this channel, I'm sharing my personal experience with different illnesses. And when I get into some more in-depth videos, like talking about the mechanisms of how the illnesses work, I do look for supporting research just to make sure that I'm getting everything right. But I've never spent so much time preparing for what I thought was going to be just a single video. But the more I get into it, I realize that I can't just get straight to the point I want to make. I kind of have to back up a little bit and then back up a bit more and then back up a bit more, and then all of a sudden I realize I've got so much information to get across as sort of a foundation before I get to the point I want to make that this is going to end up being a series on its own. When it comes to the topic of racism, stuff like that in general, I usually tend to let other people do the talking and I'll just sort of share what they've said. In this case, I really thought that that would probably be the best way to go because, to be honest, as light as I am, the amount of experiences that I've had in my life that would qualify as racist are pretty minimal. And of course, they're going to be a lot less than someone who's slightly to a lot darker than I am. So a lot of what I'm covering on this channel is rare or under-recognized invisible illnesses that most people are not familiar with at all. But I'm guessing the majority of my audience is going to be people who are familiar with these things. And still, I would say that those of you who watch this channel probably haven't heard too much about medical racism, because even in these really niche communities, it's not a topic that's really brought up that much, which is why I did want to bring attention to it. But before we even get into is medical racism a thing and what is it, I just wanted to back up first of all, because a lot of times when you bring up the subject of privilege, you get people completely dismissing it. And I want that to be clear before we go any farther. So first of all, I want to share a couple videos with you that I really like. I love the guy who makes these videos, very intelligent guy, and I saw these a couple years ago, and every time the subject comes up, I just link these videos. So first of all, check out these videos before we go any further.
What's good? My name is Charity Croff. Have you ever been called unprofessional for wearing your hair the way it naturally grows out of your scalp? Is your race accused of being terrorists for wearing scarves on their heads? Have you been stereotyped as a thug, terrorist, gang member, ghetto, lawn mowing guy, rapper, or immigrant for no reason at all when you were just like standing there? Well, if you said no to most or all of those questions, then you, my friend, have what is called white privilege. White privilege. Yes, Jacob, white privilege. He sings well. That's all the black privilege we get. Oh, and also he plays basketball. It all started with a basketball, y'all. But we're not talking about rapping, dancing, singing black privilege. We're talking about world-dominating, culturally appropriating, ruling almost every nation white privilege. Now, what entire nation is white privilege? I'll work for everything I ever got, I tell you what.
I'm sure you did, Mr. or Mrs. White Privilege, but your skin made it way easier. White privilege means no one questions why you got into that really great school or how you got that really great job. It's just assumed that you're highly qualified.
White privilege is living in a country in which 87% of the lawmakers look like you, despite the fact that your race makes up nowhere near 87% of the country.
White privilege is Googling the word beauty and it's showing hundreds of pictures of white women.
White privilege is Googling the word God and it's showing hundreds of pictures of white men.
White privilege means you don't have to worry about being monitored in the store because you look like you steal stuff.
White privilege is being 6 times less likely to be arrested than black people.
White privilege is your history being taught as a part of the core curriculum and mine being offered as an elective.
White privilege is reading a history book that doesn't start off with you being a slave or a barbaric savage.
White privilege is being able to teach history only from the perspective of the colonizer.
Speaking of colonization, white privilege is being able to get lost at sea thinking you're going to India, end up somewhere else that already had millions of people and still be credited as discovering the country. In fact, white privilege is when anything that you didn't know about is a new discovery as soon as you notice it.
White privilege means the ability to protest racism, ask for equality, and not be considered a hate group. White privilege is also having a hate group like the KKK be listed as a non-violent Christian organization and not have the rest of your race be labeled as terrorists.
White privilege is not having your application thrown out because your name is weird. In fact, white privilege is when anything that's not regular or common to your race is weird.
White privilege is being able to walk into a church, kill 8 people, then be walked out by police and taken to Burger King.
White privilege is not having the celebration of your entire race's contributions to the world relegated to just 1 month because we talk about the cool stuff your ancestors did every month.
White privilege means you won't be told to go back to your country.
White privilege is being able to come to a country and literally massacre 90% of the indigenous people and then enslave the other 10% and then say it is your God-given manifest destiny to shine from sea to shining sea. So you continue to slaughter the whole country and then give it your own name and your own laws, and yet you are never called a terrorist or a warmongering murderer or a psychopath, but instead you get your face literally carved on the side of the very mountains in which you stole, and thereby glorified forever as not a deranged killer, but a founding father who did something courageous and beautiful.
But how can we move forward if we dwell on the past? Plus, I mean, there were white slaves in America too, right?
Little nigga, no, it was not.
Well, not quite, but there were indentured servants. And in the slave codes of 1705, especially in the act concerning servants and slaves, colonial rulers so graciously awarded the poor whites certain legislated privileges.
In fact, Chet, tell them what they won.
A small plot of land, wages after their sentence was over, the right to sue masters in court, and exemption from public whipping for punishment. While at the same time, the legislator wrote down the laws which provided the institutionalized foundations for chattel slavery for Africans.
What's in the chattel slavery package, Chet?
Well, all sorts of horrible things like pulling apart families, sending children, mothers, and fathers in 3 different directions, free beatings for speaking in your native tongue, casual lynchings and public beatings, rape, and many other atrocities for a couple hundred years. Ah, so bad it's almost good. Really? Of course not. From that time on throughout U.S. history, to be white, even to be poor and white, has meant to have access to certain forms of preferential treatment or privilege. Now, this is not said to make white people feel guilty about their privilege. It's not your fault you were born with white skin, and I get it. You're not your ancestors. But whether you realize it or not, you do benefit from it, and it is your fault if you do not maintain awareness of that fact.
White privilege is absolutely a thing. And being able to deny the fact that it is a thing simply because it doesn't affect you is even a further testament to its existence. Our world has been purposefully skewed in the favor of white people. And no, you aren't responsible for your ancestors' doings. However, if we do not recognize the problem, then we can never truly remedy it. The first step to enlightenment is awareness of the darkness. If we truly want to live as one, we must first create a world that is good for all. I love you. My name is Charity Croff. The sky is blue. Also, 25% of all crime is wife assault. Yes, that's correct. So if we add up all the bad things that happened this year, 1 out of every 4 of those things is a guy beating up the woman he confessed his undying love to. But hey, welcome to planet Earth where the sky is blue and we hate niggers and women. Now hold on, my brother. Don't compare what women went through to what we as a people went through. Do you realize we had to endure over 200 years of slavery, my brother? Yes, I did, but did you know that women are still in slavery right now? More than 800,000 people are trafficked across international borders a year, and a whopping 80% of them are women and girls, mostly sold into prostitution abroad. But anyway, by a show of hands, how many ladies here feel unsafe walking by themselves at night?
Me!
This is because we live in a world in which abusing women is so common that much of the female population walks around in a constant state of fear of men. According to UN Commander Patrick Cameron, it is now more dangerous to be a woman than to be a soldier in modern wars. Rape is a weapon of war. Men find pleasure and excitement in taking away a woman's body. And afterwards, whose fault is it, ladies?
Mine! I should have never dressed like a slut. I was asking for it.
Should have never drank so much.
I was asking for it. I should have never looked at him in the eyes. I was asking for it.
You ladies know I can't control my natural male urges. You were asking for it. Still to this day, we teach little girls to dress modestly and act ladylike so that they don't tempt men to rape them. As if men are wild animals with no ability to control themselves. And yes, I know what you're thinking.
I mean, it is what it is. Yeah, in an ideal world, that would be all good, Charity. But the world that we live in, where there are men that are crazy, I'd rather my daughter be safe than sorry.
You do realize what you basically just said, right?
Cover those titties up, honey.
Listen to your mother, princess. Be careful. Don't get raped. That logic is insane, and it gets worse. Did you know that in 31 states in America, a rapist can sue the mother for custody of the baby that she had as a result of him raping her?
I have nothing to live for but my child.
Department of Child Services. Thank you. But it's okay, women can just avoid all of that and get an abortion, right? Wrong. 80% of the lawmakers that are deciding whether or not abortion is legal are dudes. Also, 80% of the policymakers that are anti-abortion are dudes. So in America, there's literally a room full of men making decisions for women bodies. Men decide for women in this country as if they own them. Speaking of ownership, marriage! With the power invested in me, I now pronounce you Mr. and Mrs. Charity Croff. If you're still on the fence about whether or not women are the niggers of the world, then consider this. My last name is Croft, which is an English European name that I have because sometime back in history when my ancestors were slaves, their owners gave us their last name to symbolize that we were now their property. Well, we still do that today, just with women. The female is just expected to take the last name of the male. In fact, in wedding ceremonies, the bride is typically walked down the aisle by her father. That means that this entire wedding ceremony is just the symbolic passing of the ownership of a woman from one man to another. Side note, it wasn't until 1993 that all 50 states considered spousal rape an actual thing. Clear up until 1993, you could rape your wife and not get in any trouble at all because technically you owned her. But hey, patriarchy isn't just safe for marriage, it's even present in dating. Janae, when you want a man to stop talking to you, what do you say?
I have a boyfriend. Sorry, I'm taken. I got a man, and he will slit your throat.
Women often use this as a go-to response because men just won't respect anything else. If you just say to a guy you're not interested, they'll probably just keep trying and trying. So it seems that the only thing they respect is the idea that you belong to another man. And hey, sometimes even that doesn't work because the next response you get is, but like, what that got to do with me though? Even I use that one, so hey, I can be a misogynistic douche as well. The moral of the story is that we live in a world that treats men as professionals, successful, leaders, thinkers, God. But women are usually just decorations, accessories, sex toys. If I showed you male nipples right now, then that's just male nipples. But if I showed you female nipples, then this video would get flagged for sexual content. That's crazy because female nipples literally provide the nourishment necessary for an infant to sustain life, while male nipples do nothing and are only present because all embryos start off as female. Why do we call the creator father when every animal on this earth was brought in by their mother? Why is the only woman that mainstream religion considers to be divine only divine because she was a virgin? With that being said, I'll end this video with a quote by Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie, spoken by women.
We teach girls shame.
Close your legs.
Cover yourself. We make them feel as though being born female, they're already guilty of something.
As so, girls grow to be women who cannot say they have desire.
They grow up to be women who silence themselves.
They grow to be women who cannot say what they truly think.
They grow up to be women who have turned pretense into an art form. Free yourself.
Free yourself.
I love you.
I love you.
Okay, so now that we've covered male privilege and white privilege, it should be pretty logical to deduce that if you're not male and not white, combining those two is gonna make things twice as difficult, right? So in a lot of chronic illness communities, especially when you're dealing with stuff like autoimmune and immune-mediated illnesses, they're affecting women at a much higher rate than men. So you've already got that going against you because chances are, if you're dealing with this, With ME, for example, I think 75% of those affected are women. That could be a huge contributor to why this illness is underfunded and under-researched. Same for so many other illnesses. Now imagine being not just a woman, but also a racial minority. That's obviously going to complicate things a lot more. Now I want to read you guys some parts that I've highlighted out of a couple of articles. First of all, can racism cause PTSD? PTSD is a severe and chronic condition that may occur in response to any traumatic event. African Americans show a prevalence rate of 9.1% for PTSD versus 6.8% in non-Hispanic whites, indicating a notable mental health disparity. PTSD may also be more disabling for minorities. Racism continues to be a daily part of American culture, and racial barriers have an overwhelming impact on the oppressed. Many minorities experience cumulative experiences of racism as traumatic, with perhaps a minor event acting as the last straw in triggering traumatic reactions. The current conceptualization of trauma as a discrete event may be limiting for diverse populations. What that means is generally what is thought of as a cause for PTSD is going to be one major traumatic event. But what they're saying is with racism, it's more like usually a lot of smaller events that just sort of build up, like daily microaggressions that eventually get to the point where you just can't take it anymore. So if you're looking at a single event, it's going to be a lot more difficult to diagnose. Minorities may be reluctant to volunteer experiences of racism to white therapists who comprise the majority of mental health clinicians. Clients may be worried that the therapist will not understand, feel attacked, or express disbelief. This is something that I can affirm because I, a few months ago, called one of those sort of, I guess, like a mental health hotline for the city, and they sent out a social worker to talk to me. In the end, I wasn't actually doing therapy with the social worker. It was sort of to like get me set up with health insurance. But I was talking to her and I said, did they match you with me because I told them that I was black? And she said, no, they don't look to match the race of the therapist with the race of the client. And I said, well, I could just imagine, being more comfortable with someone who's the same race, who has the same experience as you have. And she said, yeah, sometimes she'll be sent out to work with some Latino clients, and she can tell that even though she's black and she's obviously had her own struggles, they just kind of look at her like you just don't get what I'm going through, because obviously they've got a different history, a different story. So one point right there is there's definitely a need for more racial minorities in mental health profession. Mental health difficulties attributed to racist incidents are often questioned or downplayed, a response that only perpetuates the victim's anxiety. Thus, clients who seek out mental health care to address race-based trauma may be further traumatized by microaggressions, which are subtle racist slights, from their own therapists. Mental health professionals must be willing and able to assess race-based trauma in their minority clients. Psychologists assessing ethno-racial minorities are encouraged to directly inquire about the client's experiences of racism when determining trauma history. Some forms of race-based trauma may include racial harassment, discrimination, witnessing ethnoviolence or discrimination of another person, historical or personal memory of racism, institutional racism, microaggressions, and the constant threat of racial discrimination. The more subtle forms of racism mentioned may be commonplace, leading to constant vigilance or cultural paranoia, which may be a protective mechanism against racist incidents. However subtle, the culmination of different forms of racism may result in victimization of an individual parallel to that induced by physical or life-threatening trauma. To paraphrase, all of these racist experiences added up can equal something as traumatic as a physical or life-threatening trauma. These researchers noted similar courses of psychopathology between rape victims and victims of racism. Both events are an assault on the personhood and integrity of the victim. Similar to rape victims, race-related trauma victims may respond with disbelief, shock, or disassociation, which can prevent them from responding to the incident in a healthy manner. The victim may then feel shame and self-blame because they were unable to respond or defend themselves, which may lead to low self-concept and self-destructive behaviors. In the same study, a parallel was drawn between race-related trauma victims and victims of domestic violence. Both survivors are made to feel shame over allowing themselves to be victimized. For instance, someone who may have experienced a racist incident may be told that if they are polite, work hard, and/or dress a certain way, they will not encounter racism. When these rules are followed, yet racism persists, powerlessness, hypervigilance, and other symptoms associated with PTSD may develop or worsen. This kind of sounds like when you hear someone say, oh, well, if they had just complied with the police, they wouldn't have gotten shot. Victims of racism are on par with rape victims and domestic violence victims because it can be that traumatic. This is just looking at PTSD from racism in normal everyday situations. So imagine if you're a healthy person, you can acquire PTSD from just everyday life. Now imagine if you're sick and you have PTSD from racism on top of that. Obviously, it's already enough of a burden being sick. You don't need anything further complicating it. But then you've got, okay, I'm sick, I'm a woman of color, and I've got possible PTSD from racist encounters, not just in everyday life, but then also in the realm of being sick, right? Another article is Open Secret about racism of patients against doctors. You have patients asking, is that a Jewish name? I don't want a Jewish doctor. A little anecdote: when Jane was a third-year resident training in Boston, an angry patient told him to go back to India. I'm of Indian origin, but I was born in New York and raised in New Jersey. It was a very vivid and disturbing moment that cut deeply. My colleagues minimized what had happened, taking the approach that it comes with the territory of treating patients as a minority physician in America. That's kind of like telling actresses and models, oh, well, getting sexually assaulted comes with the territory, you know? It's just because it's commonplace does not mean it's okay and it should be viewed as acceptable. Everyone has at least experienced discrimination or witnessed discrimination, so even if they aren't the ones being discriminated against, we all need the tools. A lot of foreign medical graduates had stories about their accents and being discriminated against. Other stories were from people who were Latino, but they didn't have Hispanic last names, and they heard from their own patients about other Latino providers like, oh, I don't want those kind to take care of me. So being stuck in that position where you are those kind, but the patient doesn't know, you almost hear worse comments because they don't know who they're talking to. A nurse in Flint, Michigan was reassigned when a man requested that no Black people care for his baby. For many physicians of color, rejection by patients based on bigotry can be distressing and demeaning experiences, which cumulatively contribute to moral distress and burnout. And then there's the story of the doctor on the flight, which you might have heard about, where the flight attendant said, oh no, sweetie, put your hand down. We're looking for actual physicians or nurses or some type of medical personnel. We don't have time to talk to you. The woman, Dr. Cross, said, I tried to inform her that I was a physician. I tried to inform her that I was a physician, but I was continually cut off by condescending remarks. The flight attendant eventually asked for Cross's credentials. Then a white man approached the attendant and said that he was a doctor, and Cross was told that he would help. So the white man wasn't stopped or questioned or asked for credentials. And I didn't highlight this part, but I remember there was a part where she said she wasn't sure if it was sexism or racism, or maybe that she's younger, whatever it was. There was clearly some sort of prejudice going on there. So if patients can be prejudiced against doctors, then it should go without saying that it can go the other way as well. So basically my goal in this video was to lead up to medical racism and the idea that obviously it would make sense that it exists. But as for talking about medical racism itself, I'm gonna wait and get into that in another video before this one gets to be too long. So check back in next week for that, and I will see you guys then.